holding our subcommittee's first hearing, and it's a topic of rural broadband that Senator Tuberville and I thought was of vital importance. I'd like to thank Chair Stabenow and Ranking Member Boozman, the subcommittee ranking member, Senator Tuberville, for their support in convening this hearing. And I really want to thank all our witnesses for making the trip here and sharing your experience and knowledge. And you're on the forefront of getting broadband deployed. You know, our overall job is to revitalize rural America. And the health of rural America, we believe, is vital to the health of the nation. Our rural communities embrace strong values. They care about where they live. They care about the people they live with. They're the highest rate of enrollment in our military. We're proud of the values of rural America. It's under stress. It's under stress on its agricultural economy, and it's lost a lot of its manufacturing base. And our goal is to do all we can to help revive that. One of the big challenges in rural America is access to high-quality, high-speed internet, broadband. It's absolutely essential. In pre-COVID, a lot of us had a debate with our urban colleagues. Post-COVID, it's obvious that you can't be in the 21st century without a high-speed internet any more than you can be in rural America without electricity. And 1/3 of rural Americans are unable to access broadband of 100 megabits per second, and you've got to have speed. That's just above average speed for most internet users. And when our communities lack access to quality internet, they're locked out of the global economy and cut off from critical services, and we want to change that. Workers have fewer opportunities. Farmers and small businesses are isolated from new markets, and our kids are really limited in their educational opportunities. So we need a rural broadband that will do three things. One, it will have the high speeds, 100. It has to be future-proofed in the build-out so that 5 or 10 years from now, 1 or 2 farm bills later, we're not in the same position, lagging behind urban America. Anything short of that, we'll be back here doing this all over again. Second, we've got to make federal broadband efforts more effective and efficient. It's one thing to get the money, it's another thing to spend it wisely and make it effective and get that broadband service to the last farm on the dirt road in your small town. Finally, USDA needs the tools and flexibilities to address the long-term scalable broadband needs of underserved rural communities. And all of our communities are somewhat different. That's what makes the challenge so great, even in Vermont, which we'll hear about. We've got places where there's lots of mountains. We've got places where it's kind of flat. And today, I introduced along with Senator Marshall, I introduced the Reconnecting Rural America Act. That bill, number one, would establish 100 symmetrical build-out speeds. Number two, set unserved definitions to ensure the program is reaching those who need broadband the most and not building where it's not needed. Next, expand USDA's authority to coordinate with other federal agencies. And finally, provide sufficient authorization levels to address the overwhelming demand that the program currently experiences. Now, the Northeast Kingdom, and this is on the topic of effective implementation, is a small section, beautiful section, proud section of Vermont, and it serves many underserved homes. Today, the Northeast Kingdom Broadband, represented by one of our witnesses, I'm happy to announce, received an award of $17.5 million from USDA's Reconnect program to address the broadband needs of this region in Vermont. The money's going to go a long way to helping us in the kingdom. We have confidence that the NEK, Northeast Kingdom Broadband, will get it done right. That's because they are based in their community. Vermont has established community union districts that are voluntary association of towns. It's not based in Wall Street where hedge funds smell the money and come in, walk away, and don't get the job done. So we've got a lot to do and a lot to hear from. We can do this. You know, rural electrification, that was 100 years ago. It took about 15 years. And that was a social commitment, not a business decision. It was based on a recognition by Congress of the importance of rural America. We've got to do that again. I really want to thank all the witnesses who are here, and I'm now going to turn to my counterpart, my colleague in this effort, and I've really enjoyed working with you and your staff. You've been terrific. Senator Tuberville.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And look forward to working with you. I think we can get a lot done. Special thanks to all the witnesses here today, especially Mr. Fred Johnson, who I've known for a while. Thanks for coming all the way from Alabama. I look forward to our discussion, and as we all know, this is not just for Alabama, all over the country. Rural broadband is important. We've had the internet for years, and we're struggling in that area. In today's day and age, access to reliable internet service is not a want, it is a need. It's vital. Rural communities cannot compete, much less survive, with urban areas unless they have broadband internet. If the pandemic taught us anything, it's that Americans need reliable and fast internet to work, take online classes, and complete homework, have virtual meetings through Zoom, and participate in telemedicine. Additionally, our farmers rely on internet access to operate their equipment and operations. The technology of farming is constantly changing, and our producers need resources to remain competitive. Modern farming utilizes precision agriculture technologies, tractors, and combines with GPS systems and irrigation equipment that can be managed remotely from smartphones and tablets. Without internet access, our farmers cannot farm, and our rural communities will get left behind. In Alabama, 55 out of the 67 counties are considered rural. Out of the state's population, 43.6% live in rural areas. Rural development programs aim to prioritize investment in the most rural and unserved areas across the country, which are often economically depressed. In Alabama, this region is called the Black Belt, which consists of 19 counties in the western part of the state. The Black Belt is the home to 9 out of 10 most economically challenged counties in the state. These areas are in critical need of support and development. A vital step in developing our rural communities is ensuring access to reliable broadband service. And that's why I'm here today to advocate not only just for Alabama, but for the entire country. We need to work on this farm bill for rural internet. 2 key considerations need to be kept top of mind throughout our discussions today on broadband in the farm bill: prioritizing unserved areas and considering feasible build-out speeds to provide reliable service. In their latest funding proposal, the USDA increased requirements for the sufficient broadband access from speeds of 25/3 megabytes per second to 100/20 megabytes per second download and upload speeds. Yet, about 10% of Alabamians do not have access to download and upload speeds of 25/3. Furthermore, only 34% of my state has access to fiber optic service, which can supply 100/100 symmetrical speeds. How are we supposed to close the digital divide if we are leaving our rural communities in the dust? The subcommittee cannot focus solely on providing fast speeds when we continue to have areas with no service at all. These service gaps are what we should consider when allocating resources. We, as a subcommittee, should consider all technology options to deliver broadband to our rural communities. While fiber deployment has been hugely successful in Alabama, other states may have positive experiences with other types of deployment, given various terrains and local needs. Regardless, we should advocate for deployment of at least 100/20 speeds across the country. Turning our attention to the unserved areas is the best way to develop rural communities. We must prioritize broadband deployment to unserved and underserved areas. With this game plan, we ensure efficient use of taxpayer resources and don't leave communities behind. I look forward to working with my colleagues to craft effective broadband policy that benefits all Americans. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Tuberville. And without objection, I'll introduce into the record 2 letters, one from Rural Development and another from a group of interested parties on broadband. And now I'd like to introduce the witnesses, and I'll be quick because we want to hear from them more than about them. But Roger Nishi is the Vice President for Industry Relations at Waitsfield and Champlain Valley Telecom in Vermont. He currently serves on the Board of Directors for the Technology Association of New England and Telecom Insurance Group. 36 years of experience. Thank you, Roger, for being here. Krista Shute is the Executive Director of NEK Broadband in St. Johnsbury, Vermont. She's been a leader in broadband since 2009, has 20 years of management experience. Her organization, NEK Broadband, serves one of the most rural parts of our state. And she recently secured the state's first ever Reconnect Award, as in today. Krista and her team will make excellent use of this funding. Congratulations. Senator Durbin is not here. He wanted to introduce Mr. Shackleton, but he is unsparing in his praise for the work you've done. And what I understand is you're Director of Broadband Operations at Joe Carroll Energy, and that's a rural electric, natural gas, and broadband facility in Elizabeth, Illinois. Senator Tuberville, would you like to introduce Mr. Johnson and Mr. Ford?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm proud to introduce Mr. Fred Johnson of Rainsville, Alabama. Fred has served as the president and CEO of Farmers Telecommunications Cooperative in Rainsville since 2002. Fred is renowned throughout North Alabama for his work to bridge the digital divide and put Alabama on the map. His company's Farmers Telecommunications Cooperative, or FTC, is the state's largest member-owned provider of telecommunications services. FTC was also the first Alabama company to deploy a widely adopted gigabit internet access service and now delivers multi-gig speeds throughout their service area. Fred's career spans 41 years in the fields of rural communications, telecommunications, rural electrification, and public accounting. He is a member and current vice president of the board of directors of Rural Telephone Finance Cooperative. Previously, he served on the rural board of the chairman of the Rural Broadband Association. He received his undergraduate degree from Southern Wesleyan University and has a graduate degree from the University of Tennessee, which we won't hold against him, Chattanooga. He is currently pursuing a doctorate in business administration from Southern, and I'm grateful for the hard work he's done so far in deploying broadband in Alabama. And Mr. Forty, thank you for being here. Next, I'm proud to introduce Mr. Forty as a guy from North Dakota. Got pretty good football teams. A special thanks to Senator Thune and his office for facilitating the connection to have Justin with us today. Justin is the Vice President of Government Relations for Mid-Continent Communications, or MidCo, and has worked for the company since 2014. MidCo is the leading provider of reliable high-speed internet via fiber and fixed wireless technology across the West and Midwest. Before joining MidCo, Justin served on my colleague, Senator John Hoeven's staff, so he's very familiar with the Senate hearings and the Ag Committee. Justin has served on the board of several organizations, nonprofits, including Greater North Dakota Chapter, Minnesota Cable Communications, and so on. He earned his bachelor's degree from Northern State University and master's from Florida State. So glad you're here.
Thank you. Roger Nishi, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Senator Welch, Ranking Member Tuberville, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for holding this hearing and asking me to testify today. My name is Roger Nishi, and I'm the Vice President of Industry Relations at Waitsfield and Champlain Valley Telecom in Vermont. WCVT is a 119-year-old, family-owned, third-generation, community-based rural broadband provider serving the Mad River Valley and Champlain Valley regions of Vermont. WCVT strongly believes in the USDA programs. We have had a relationship with USDA and RUS and the predecessor REA for many years. In the early 1960s, the Haskin families literally bet the farm, and when no one else would give them a loan locally, signed a 25-year loan with REA for $400,000 to install new direct dial telephone equipment. 7 years later, they went back to REA and secured $640,000 to bring single-party service to all of their customers, the first in Vermont to do so. Jump forward to 2010, WCVT was a recipient and awarded $5.56 million from the RUS Broadband Initiative Program to bring fiber to approximately 740 locations within the company's service area, to areas where DSL just did not make sense. So over the years, our network has evolved from cordboard operators to the computer digital switches of today, with internet from dial-up to the various flavors of DSL, and now our main focus is on fiber. Each progression has brought better service or greater speeds to our customers. As we continue to evolve our networks and connecting our communities, there are several ways that USDA can help move our rural networks forward. Number one, future-proof the networks in rural America by building fiber. This can be accomplished by keeping the minimum speed for eligible projects administered by USDA to receive funds at the 100 over 100 level. 100 over 100 means fiber. We've been saying fiber is our future at WCVT for many, many years, and the same needs to be said of all rural areas. Other technologies have limitations, do not have the future capacity of fiber, and cannot keep pace with the ever-expanding demands of our customers. Investing in fiber is the best money spent and the most effective use of federal funding. Number two, experience matters and track records of success should be taken into consideration. We believe that USDA programs should prioritize funding with those serving rural areas today and those that have shown that they can do the job. And also those that have worked with USDA in the past with loans, they should work with them also. One thing that I'd like to note is any grant application scoring should not penalize commercial companies. Number three, we need to limit overbuilds by having all of the organizations work together to ensure that there aren't overbuilds and there's not duplicative funding. It's just an inefficient use of federal funding when we do so. A key to this is accurate maps, and those accurate maps will help make sure that we do serve those that are unserved today. Further, we need to limit projects delays due to permitting. Too many times today, jobs are slowed down because of the permitting process. We need to make sure that there are time limits put on approvals and also adequate staffing to do the reviews. While the USD programs help build networks and support community developments, I do need to mention other programs that aren't part of your jurisdiction but work hand in hand with the grants and loan programs. Universal service funds, which help ensure sustainable networks. The FCC's ACAM and CAF-BLS universal service programs complement loan and grant funding. The funding contributes to construction budgets, help maintain, sustain, and upgrade networks, as help keep rates reasonably affordable for all customers. Such funding makes everyone's business case for many rural companies. I encourage you all to call the FCC and urge them to take immediate action on extending ACAM and CAF-BLS companies. The next item, do not tax grants. Pass S.341. Thank you for co-sponsoring that, Senator. Right now, if Waitsfield receives grants, approximately 21% will go to pay taxes. It's really discouraging knowing that that money could be going to build broadband to more rural customers. Finally, I'm running out of time, so I'll be really quick. The Affordable Connectivity Program. We do need to make sure that this is sustained and funded, and over time, increase that $30 amount that goes to consumers, because $30 does not make broadband always affordable.
Thank you.
Thank you for hearing from me today, and appreciate the time. Thank you.
Yep, thank you very much. Krista Shute.
Thanks very much, Chair Welch and Ranking Member Tuberville and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity. As the Executive Director of NEK Broadband, I'm here to share my experiences with the USDA development programs and why I believe the continuation of Reconnect is so critical to the economic vitality of rural America, and some of my top concerns and recommendations for your consideration. We're one of 10 communications union districts in Vermont. We're formed of 56 towns in the northeast portion of the state. It's an exceptionally beautiful but rugged and rural area. We applied and received, as was announced just now, the Reconnect Award. That's $17.5 million. is part of a $23.5 million project. It will bring 321 miles of infrastructure across 22 of our most rural and underserved towns to serve 3,300 people, 94 businesses, 183 farms, and 11 educational facilities. So a huge thank you to the work of the USDA staff as they've been helpful and responsive. We all know the importance of broadband and how critical it is to our rural communities. I'll just share a couple of real experiences. Teachers have remarked on the dramatic and heartbreaking difference between those that were able to continue learning and those that were not due to the lack of broadband access. And this continues as we move more and more to digital learning. The other key for most of our areas, rural areas, are the vast distances that they must travel for health care. This week, Blue Cross Blue Shield stopped reimbursing for telephone visits, which means we must develop access to broadband and create affordability for everyone, in part through continued authorization of the Affordable Connectivity Program, because the need extends beyond the pandemic. Reconnect is necessary because the BEAD program simply won't be enough to achieve universal service. Like many other programs, BEAD focuses on the lower cost per address for a competitive grant for the lower cost per address. And as a result, it's going to favor the more populated rural areas. It's going to go to rural America, but it's going to go to the more populated areas. This is going to exacerbate the issue in the most rural of rural America. The competition for Reconnect funds, on the other hand, is based on characteristics that support our most rural communities and addresses the true cost to get to some of these sparsely populated areas. I applaud the Appropriations Act providing $365 million for round 5 of Reconnect, but it undermines two key characteristics of the Reconnect program and makes it, virtually unusable for all of Vermont and a lot of other areas that have spotty coverage through wireless. First, those eligible areas in Reconnect 3 and 4 were based on 120 megabyte per second service, and the Act requires that 90% of the area have 25.3 service. So this will disqualify Vermont and other areas with fixed wireless. Second, Reconnect 3 and 4 focused on long-term infrastructure investment. The USDA understood that we needed to make long-term investments so that we didn't need to make them again, and that means building a standard of 100 megabytes per second symmetrical by building with fiber. My top recommendations for the existing Reconnect program include the definition of rurality, the importance of public infrastructure, and the application process. Currently, Reconnect heavily favors some parts of the country over others. Primarily, the two pieces are the 100 miles from a city or town with a population of 50,000, which is most of the eastern seaboard doesn't qualify, and with less than 6 people per square mile. So the reality is that rurality is not a straight line. You can't get there from here is a common New England expression because it can be complicated to get from one point to another due to topography, terrain, and weather. Similar challenges exist throughout the Appalachian Range and the Rockies. So consider providing rurality points based on population per town, for example, with towns with less than 5,000 people. For public infrastructure, that is currently a point structure under Reconnect, and it is an important one. When we invest in public infrastructure, we are reinvesting our dollars over and over again. We believe in public-private partnerships like we have with Waitsfield Champlain Valley Telecom, where the municipal owns the underlying infrastructure and leverages the expertise of a private company. We can protect our grant dollars and create public accountability by ensuring that municipalities have access to these funds. I do have top recommendations around the application process, particularly that I would love to share with you, and I can do that in the question section perhaps. So I'd like to conclude by saying that broadband is fundamentally an equity issue. Rural areas, and particularly low-income residents, need access to broadband for the basics of education and telehealth. So I support the Reconnecting Rural America Act with the modifications that I noted in my testimony. Thanks very much.
Mr. Shackleton.
Chairman Welch, Ranking Member Tuberville, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. My name is Jesse Shackleton, and I serve as Director of Broadband Operations for Joe Carroll Energy, a rural energy and broadband cooperative headquartered in Elizabeth, Illinois. Joe Carroll Energy formed in 1939, leveraging a USDA loan to help close what then would have been the electric divide. Since then, Joe Carroll Energy has grown to provide reliable and affordable electric and natural gas services to a combined total of more than 26,000 families, farms, and small businesses in Northwest Illinois. Joe Carroll also provides vital broadband service to nearly 4,000 members and growing fast. USDA's Reconnect and Community Connect programs have been key contributors to this build-out in rural Northwest Illinois. As a not-for-profit, member-owned cooperative, Joe Carroll Energy is locally controlled and strives to keep its services safe, affordable, and reliable. In 2008, we began offering fixed wireless broadband services to our members, but due to issues with reliability, capacity, and intermittency, we have now pivoted to building a fiber-only network. We have determined that fiber is the most effective and economic technology to provide robust broadband to our rural communities. Fiber allows us to ensure that the investments we make in this network today will be able to meet existing and future utility needs, as well as improve the economic outlook and quality of life in the rural communities we serve. Through USDA's Reconnect and Community Connect grant programs, Joe Carroll has been able to expand its broadband footprint to connecting areas of 8 public school districts, 3 fire stations, and numerous farms, families, and businesses with fiber broadband. Fiber enables us also as a utility to better manage consumer demands for electric and natural gas service during peak times, as well as expand other smart grid offerings to our members. Improved connectivity also provides a massive benefit to one of the largest economic sectors in Illinois, agriculture. Precision agriculture has grown in recent years, with farmers and ranchers leveraging a wide range of connected devices to reduce input costs and improve yields. As precision and smart ag technologies expand to include autonomous tractors, soil sampling, or field mapping, demands for bandwidth on the farm will continue to grow, underscoring why a robust and scalable connection is essential. As Congress considers how to best support rural connectivity through the upcoming Farm Bill, I'd like to offer a few suggestions. Congress should prioritize scalable, future-proof networks in any future rounds of federal funding for broadband. Consumer and technology demands for increased internet speeds continue to grow and are trending toward a need for multi-gigabit service by 2030. Prioritizing symmetrical speeds and network technologies that are scalable will ensure that rural and remote areas are able to meet consumer needs both now and into the future. Additionally, federal programs, including those managed by USDA, do not move quickly, and there are long lags in deployment. It is often months, many months from the time an award is announced to the time construction is started. Permitting issues, supply chain delays, challenges in finding a qualified workforce, and inflation are commonplace and can be detrimental to the original feasibility of a project. Streamlining the permitting processes will better align project timelines with the consumer needs of today. More than 80 years ago, not-for-profit electric cooperatives partnered with the USDA to bring electric service to areas that were challenging and too costly for investor-owned utilities to serve. Today, electric cooperatives are once again partnering with USDA to bring vital broadband services to those same areas. On behalf of Joe Carroll Energy, I want to thank the Chair and Ranking Member for inviting me to testify today. Reliable, scalable internet access is critical to the growth and economic development of rural communities in Northwest Illinois and across the country. Joe Carroll and the rest of our nation's electric cooperatives look forward to working with you in our shared goal of connecting all Americans with a robust and reliable internet connection. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Johnson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Welch, Ranking Member Tuberville, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. I am old enough to have had the unique experience of being challenged by a number of the wise men and women who were responsible for the earlier rural development of our area. They challenged me to carry on that effort. To that end, I am humbled and grateful to have the opportunity to speak to you today about this particular subject. The reason is simple. What you do here makes a difference in the lives of the people I serve and millions like them across the land. The unprecedented commitment of the United States Congress to expand the deployment of broadband holds great promise for the nation. Yet the task is substantial and there are pitfalls to be avoided. Important lessons drawn from the prior successes must not be forgotten. The Farm Bill affords you an opportunity to ensure they are not. I hope that my comments today are helpful in that regard. First and foremost, may I suggest that the U.S. Congress demand that broadband resources provided under the Farm Bill be used for getting broadband to those who do not have it. The goal is not to duplicate existing investment or to generate artificial competition in areas that already cannot support even a single unsubsidized competitor. If scarce taxpayer resources are to be efficiently used, those tax dollars must go first to those who need it most. Commonly, USDA funding has required that at least 90% of a proposed service area be incapable of receiving service equal to or greater than 100 megabits downstream and 200 megabits per second upstream. Now, arguments may be made to lower this eligibility threshold, but only in view of one important fact. The lower the threshold, whatever it may be, the higher the probability that taxpayer dollars will be used for duplicating networks rather than serving the unserved, and further imperiling the ability of existing providers to economically leverage their existing networks in areas where others will not provide service. By focusing more granularly on proposed funding areas, Alabama has a good track record in this regard. Even would-be competitors have rallied around a program that does not foster conflict among providers, but rather enable service to the truly unserved. Indeed, free from imminent threats of government-funded competition, two of my Alabama colleagues, Pine Belt Telephone and Communications and the Haynesville Telephone Company, have just utilized a mix of USDA funding and private equity for what I think is collectively the largest single investment yet in broadband infrastructure in some of the most economically challenged areas of Alabama. In fact, two of the counties to which Ranking Member Tuberville referred in his opening comments. I should also note that these two colleagues are family-owned, community-based providers with a history of supporting their community. The rule should not discourage the participation of companies like that in this program. Out of concern for time, I'll confine the balance of my remarks to 5 quick points. First, 100 megabit symmetrical broadband should continue to be USDA's minimum standard of services for funding in new development. USDA investments should support technology that can be readily upgraded to deliver the fastest speeds over the long term. Some technologies may appear cheaper to deploy now, but they will be unable to keep pace with consumer demand. 2, federal grants must be entirely spent for designated purposes and should not thereafter be subject to federal taxation. That is illogical, and we appreciate the efforts at co-sponsoring on Senate Bill 341. 3, meaningful improvement in permitting at all levels of government is essential for efficient deployment. 4th, we encourage you to give RUS the ability and flexibility to allow concurrent expenditures of grant funds and matching dollars. This will eliminate potential financial hardship, yet it will preserve the much-needed requirement that grant recipients be sufficiently invested in the program. And finally, we strongly urge coordination of federal resources across all aid platforms and programs. That is absolutely essential. Remember that basic voice telephone connectivity, including access to 911, is still essential for many areas that do not have reliable cell service, a fact that is often overlooked. Support the efforts of your colleagues in this regard to modernize the future of the Federal Universal Service Program. It is absolutely essential to preserving much of what has been done. Albert Einstein once said this: "Everything should be made as simple as possible, but never more so." In the frame of that reference, Please remember that the successful deployment of broadband in rural America is not a singular model of identical blocks. It is a tapestry involving the efforts of diverse existing and would-be providers. I encourage you to maintain your focus on the customers in our country who have no or inadequate service. Take note of the lessons learned by successful providers. It will go a long way to keeping rural Americans fully connected to our world. Know that I and the people I serve appreciate your leadership on this issue. Thank you for your service and for allowing me to address you today.
Thank you very much. And now our last witness, Mr. Forty.
Chair Welch, Ranking Member Tuberville, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me here to discuss Midco's experience with federal broadband funding programs. My name is Justin Forty, and I'm the Vice President of Government Relations for Mid-Continent Communications. Nearly 500,000 residential and business customers count on Midco services across 5 states: South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, Kansas, and Wisconsin. The majority of the approximately 450 communities we serve are very rural, with most having populations closer to 500 than 5,000. The last few years have put a renewed spotlight on the importance of broadband connectivity for all Americans. And at Midco, we have risen to the challenge of connecting as many of our friends and neighbors as possible. We have invested over $765 million the last 6 years to extend and upgrade our network. In 2021, we launched an initiative to invest another $500 million to future-proof our existing network and to expand to new communities. And we are making great progress. Today, I can report that 100% of Midco's wireline customers are receiving speeds that exceed 1 gig, many already receiving 5 gig speeds for those customers. And our growth has included important progress in reaching previously unserved areas, thanks to our partnerships with the FCC through its CAF2 and RDOF auctions, as well as our partnerships with the states we serve. For example, we were recently awarded 2 grants through the Minnesota Office of Broadband Development, totaling over $2.5 million for deployments to improve connectivity in Isanti County, in Lakes Country in Minnesota, and in Forest Lake along the St. Croix River. And 2 grants in South Dakota, one in the very tough-to-serve Black Hills area and one along the Missouri River west of Yankton. We are committed to our rural communities and believe that they are being overlooked by many programs today. Unserved communities lack broadband for one reason above all others: they are expensive to serve. Programs like Reconnect could help companies to incentivize to build, but recent changes to the program have significantly shifted the focus away from truly unserved areas in rural America. This leads to my first recommendation. The Reconnect program should absolutely refocus on unserved areas. While rural areas originally had to have 95% of households unserved to be eligible for funding, the most recent round reduced that threshold to a mere 50% of households. This decrease encourages overbuilding and does not make good use of government funds. For example, we were recently overbuilt by 2 Reconnect awards in rural South Dakota, even though we were building those areas funded by Connect America Fund Phase 2 FCC auction awards. What this stops is there are still other parts of South Dakota who still lack broadband, while 2 providers are receiving funding from USDA and 1 from the FCC to serve the exact same areas. Similarly, the level of broadband service to be required for an area to be considered served has been raised from 25/3 to 100/20. As a result, areas that already had robust broadband service are suddenly eligible as unserved. Applications for Reconnect have focused on these areas which are easier to serve and near population centers. While they get new service, other areas just down the road that are rural have struggled to attract broadband deployment, and those truly rural and tough-to-serve areas still remain without broadband. Second, broadband funding programs must be technology neutral and encourage broad participation. Certain communities present topographical or other challenges that make building wireline a poor solution. We are still able to reach many of these rural communities because we edge out from our fiber network using fixed wireless technology. But the build-to speeds often required to obtain funding mean we often cannot apply if some portion of the network needs to be fixed wireless. Programs need flexibility to accommodate different technological solutions to take care of our customers and your constituents. Third, barriers to participation need to be as low as possible. Even with recent improvements, the amount of data required for Reconnect applications is vastly excessive. Some of the rules, including the government having a first lien on assets, simply make this program unworkable for private capital. And finally, federal and state agencies absolutely must coordinate to ensure a common understanding of unserved areas. Maps used for broadband grant funding should be consistent and should show all areas where funding has been awarded, whether that be federal, state, or local, or even if facilities have not yet been constructed. Entities should not be able to form shop for the least restrictive program. In one case, we've successfully challenged a grant from a provider who already lost RDOF and CAF 2 auctions to build under the Reconnect program, only to have the applicant still go for a fourth funding source to serve the same area and be awarded it under the ARPA Capital Projects Fund. One promising piece of legislation that would address many of these issues that we have identified is the Rural Internet Improvement Act of 2023. It would make many key improvements to the Reconnect program, focus funding on unserved areas, reduce those participation burdens, and require tighter agency coordination. These are key changes so that broadband actually reaches the folks in rural America that need it faster. I commend the committee for its focus on ensuring that the billions of dollars spent on broadband deployment benefit all Americans, including those in rural America. Thank you again for inviting me here today, and we look forward to working with you on these important issues.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of the witnesses. And we'll begin now 5-minute rounds of questions for each member. Mr. Nishi, I want to have you talk a little bit about this question of the 100-100 versus a different standard. And, you know, I have a concern about future-proofing. Technology changes very quickly. And technology neutral is one thing, but there is a question about having broadband that has the capacity to be able to benefit by any improvements in technology, so we don't have a situation where rural America is left behind 5 or 10 years from now. That's my point of view, but we also have this demand where people have no service whatsoever, and a lot of folks might think anything is better than nothing. But can you talk about that? Because in my Reconnecting Rural America Act with Senator Marshall, we would establish symmetrical speeds of 100 over 100.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. 100 over 100 are fiber networks. It's time to get the base built out in the rural areas. And the base is getting fiber to each and every location within the areas we serve. Over time, we'll be able to update the electronics on the fiber to bring multiple gigabit speeds to our customers in future years. No other technology right now has the future that we can provide over the fiber. So it's just now is the time to focus on fiber and get fiber everywhere as soon as possible, as it will be the most efficient use of the federal funding dollars that are available.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Shute, can you just explain a little bit about the community union district concept in Vermont and whether you think they should be, entities like that should be eligible for Reconnect grants?
Certainly. So a communications union district is a municipality. It's been formed by multiple municipalities that join together to provide communication services to the area. Our focus is on the unserved, primarily those with less than 3 megabytes per second wired service. And that effectively means that anybody less than cable. The Communication Union District also provides the opportunity for a public infrastructure point, and it's important that we have the opportunity to build the infrastructure and operate in these communities where it's not been feasible for private companies to do so.
Thank you. Mr. Shackleton, I appreciated your testimony about coordination, really important. Based on your experience, how would the Reconnect program benefit from USDA having more flexibility with coordinating with other federal agencies? And also, do you support the inclusion of other provisions in the Reconnecting Rural America Act in the Farm Bill, such as the 100-100 speed requirement, increased authorization levels, and the coordination?
Yes, thank you for the question, Senator. The benefit of the USDA having greater flexibility coordinating with other federal agencies, I think that's the benefit there is USDA's rich history in its commitment to rural America. And so I think in a coordination with the other agencies, the USDA could actually stand out to be a leader in those coordination efforts. Mm-hmm. And, you know, USDA has been providing the telecom industry with loans and grants for decades. They have a long history of experience in this arena, and so I think there's a great benefit there, and in including some of the streamlined permitting opportunities that USDA could bring to the table and help lead a more effective and efficient process.
Thank you. In the streamlined permitting seems to be a common concern that every one of you has. Is that correct? And also the taxation of grants to bleed away what you could be spending on broadband deployment is a real problem as well, shared by all of the witnesses. Thank you. My time is just about up, so I'm going to yield to the ranking member, Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're going to see people moving in and out because we have a vote going on as we speak. So, again, thanks for all of you being here. Let's talk about service speeds real quick. Mr. Forty and Mr. Johnson, for instance, my state in Alabama, there's 190,000 people that are considered underserved. And we have service speeds that are 25 over 3 megabytes per second. According to the USDA definitions, an unserved area is considered one with available speeds of 100 over 20, when before it was 25 over 3. Given this change, how can we ensure areas with 25 over 3 or even less are going to have service? Mr. Johnson, Mr. Forty.
Senator Tuberville, in the state of Alabama, we are now focusing on a threshold of 100 over 20, but you are absolutely correct. There are many people that do not have access to service of 25/3. If we look at the best available data today, a family of 4 is already demanding bandwidth in excess of 100 meg symmetrical service, if you look at some of the best data that is available today. In light of that, we're way past arguing that 25/3 is an acceptable service standard for any level of service. It gets a little more dicey when we come up to the next step. Now, 100 over 20 is the threshold for eligibility, but in the state of Alabama, there is great preference shown to the expenditure of grant funds for projects that will deliver at 100 over 100. Now, obviously, FTC is a complete supporter of the concept that if we go out, certainly more than 8 to 10 years, optical fiber technology is likely to be the only service that will be able to meet the bandwidth demands that are currently projected. To be certain, the DOCSIS 4.0 standard of the cable industry will serve very well in the interim in many cases, as long as the networks are very sufficiently robust and well maintained. But nonetheless, if you look at existing capacity demands and you go out beyond 8 to 10 years, you are forced to look at long-term solutions, which we firmly believe are best served by extending optical fiber as far as you possibly can, given the amount of funds that are available.
Mr. Forty.
First of all, what we're seeing is as these speed thresholds have increased from 25/3 to 100 over 20, almost 100% of the applications that we're seeing are for areas between 25/3 and 100 over 20. Therefore, nearly 100% of the remaining addresses in our highly rural areas that had less than 25/3 still remain at that. We are truly not accomplishing the fact of trying to get to those unserved addresses as these speed thresholds have increased. Certainly, I would say that all of our technologies that we deploy, whether they be the hybrid, whether it's our fiber system, our hybrid fiber coax system, or our fixed wireless, they are all future-proof, and we have no issues with delivering higher speeds on any of those technologies. We do not find that any consumer cares how they got their broadband service as long as it is fast and reliable. And third, no consumers are using 100 over 100 symmetrical speeds. It is a download world. We want to provide their consumers with what they want and need today and tomorrow, and should not have to be providing 100 megabit upload speeds that nobody is using. Even during COVID, we saw very little increase in upload speeds. It's still 14 to 17 times higher in download speeds. It's a download world, not an upload world. We shouldn't be building those networks for folks that aren't using them.
Mr. Forty, you talked about how fiber deployment works in certain terrains, especially your area of the country. What broadband technologies have you seen deployed in these areas that actually work? I mean, what's the best availability for you?
We like to use the best technology for our, for our customer and your constituents, right? When you're talking about serving the last hard-to-reach areas, you're talking about the Black Hills of South Dakota. You're talking about the Iron Range in northern Minnesota, right? Some of these areas have very tough geography. You could be dealing with as much as $100,000 per mile to drill through rock, right? You could be dealing with an 8 or 9 mile long driveway, right? It's simply irresponsible to try to run fiber through some of these locations when a fast, reliable fixed wireless connection can easily do the job and take care of the consumer. The other thing I'll note, especially this winter in the northern part of the country, we dealt with pretty much 8 months of frozen ground, right? We were able to deploy fixed wireless technology to serve folks who needed it in blizzards, right? It simply it would take years and uneconomical to run fiber through all those areas.
Mr. Johnson, you got different parts in Alabama.
Yes, sir, and I would respectfully take issue with some of my colleagues' assertions there, but I'll try to keep it very fact-based. Approximately 20% of my consumer base now takes gigabit service. I am also routinely required to certify frequently to a number of employers in the Chattanooga, Tennessee area that their employees who are working from home not voluntarily, but as a requirement of their jobs, are able to receive both download and upload speeds at or greater than 100 megabit symmetrical service. So our experience with our user profiles is entirely different from his in that regard. And to that end, I will tell you that consumers today will become very concerned with both their download and upload speeds when their demand requirements exceed them. Now, granted, some of them today are not, but when those download speeds are no longer sufficient, they will care very much about them.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, we would stand ready to provide those download speeds whenever our customers, or those download and upload speeds whenever our customers need them.
Thank you. Amy.
I guess I'm chairing, so I'm calling on myself at this moment. So, Mr. Nishi, I'm the co-chair of the Senate Broadband Caucus, along with several others, and we've worked to connect every American to high-speed broadband. Could you talk about why providing broadband internet high-speed is a key rural development priority? And Mr. Johnson, what tools do we need to streamline and bolster USDA broadband?
Thank you for this question, Senator. Rural development in all of our areas is key, and getting the broadband to out in the rural areas, it's needed. And it comes back to the whole concept of universal service, where we believe that rural areas should have reasonable and comparable services at reasonable and comparable rates to those in the urban areas. Now, people can argue and say that the rural areas don't need symmetrical service, but I can say that architects, designers, and others do need to upload speed to do their jobs, and they should not be limited where they live by the broadband that they receive in the areas that they do live.
Okay, very good. Mr. Johnson, just quickly.
Okay. The most brief recap I can give you is meaningful improvements in permitting, especially at the federal level, but really at all levels of government. Allowing the concurrent expenditure of matching dollars with grant funds rather than forcing a full expenditure of the matching dollars up front will aid in the provision of capital across the board. And finally, coordination, especially with those in the Congress that have oversight of the Federal Universal Service Fund. Remember that these grants build the networks. They do not sustain them or operate them.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Forty, thank you for mentioning the Iron Range, the birthplace of my dad. In your testimony, you highlight your company's collaboration with farmers in Minnesota. How can we best ensure that farmers, ranchers, those in agriculture are getting connected at fast speeds, which is a bit of our goal out here?
Well, thank you so much, Senator. And it's a pleasure to see you again, and a pleasure to do so much great work around your state. We've got great projects going on from International Falls using ARPA dollars along Lake of the Woods. We're building cities like Greenfield, Minnesota, and Annandale with 100% private capital. And as you mentioned, in the ag community, we've partnershiped with Land O'Lakes, and we're using fixed wireless from Elevators, which is providing an 8-mile circle of 100/20 service to about 2,700 farms and ranches. The important thing about that is that provides that fast, reliable service, not only to those farms and ranches, but also other agriculture items that are located there. For the future of precision ag, it's important that we reach sugar beet piling stations in the Red River Valley, grain dryers. These things need connections as well. And we want to, again, provide the right connection for the ag community and all the different communities throughout Minnesota, and happy to continue to do that with so many great projects going around all across your state.
Okay. Mr. Nishi, back to you. You mentioned the MOU in your testimony, and could you talk about, and this is the MOU, FCC, USDA, Treasury, this agreement to share information about reporting of data and metrics relating to broadband deployment, just because we've had issues. Senator Wicker and I have worked on this and passed a law to require this. I know you mentioned it. How can agencies work together better so we get accurate information?
So the MOU really does help, because that has shown that they have talked and that that they've come to agreement that they need to work together. But there does need to be oversight from Congress to make sure that they're following the MOU and keeping them on track. So I think it's something to where they are now working together, but it does need your oversight to ensure that they do stay on track.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shackleton, making sure consumers have reliable service is a 24/7 job. Could you talk about some of the difficulties providers face when they are ready to go with new projects, but there's workforce issues? I'm a personal believer that we need to do something sane with immigration reform, including visa caps and workforce permits, because we just don't have enough workers in some of the areas of jobs in rural America right now, including nursing homes and including tourism and including ag. So go ahead.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. And yes, workforce development is definitely a key issue and a challenge, and maybe arguably a growing challenge right now. So we are making concerted efforts to basically mitigate that and try to get ahead of what is already a busy schedule with our build-outs, and now with the looming BEAD funding allocations that are coming. The state of Illinois, for example, is right now, I believe, earmarked to get between $900 million and up to $1 billion in BEAD funding. So that is a lot of work to get done, and I can tell you, working on the front lines of rural America on a daily basis, the people want it yesterday. So we need to get the workforce up and running and trained before these allocations of funds are released, so that when the funds are released, we have the people staffed up, ready to go to work. We're currently working. We have an MOU locally. I think local outreach and collaboration activities are key. It's almost like a grassroots movement of workforce development, if you will. So we're working with local educators, community colleges, our local Illinois Works group, and different CTE programs, and really trying to create these classroom to career pathways, because that truly is the feeder program to our future workers.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, and I want to thank both Chairman Welch and Ranking Member Tuberville. I'm pleased to be here. Sorry to be late. Senator Bozeman and I think, are both running on the same schedule here this afternoon. But yeah, in the absence until Senator Welch returns, I will call on folks. And first, Senator Bozeman. Would you? Okay, Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Senator Bozeman. I appreciate your graciousness. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. Broadband and connectivity overall is becoming essential to power modern agriculture. Farmers and ranchers are integrating undersoil sensors, variable rate irrigation, high-tech ear tags for livestock, and many other technologies into their operations. To make full use of precision agriculture innovation, we need to close the gap and connect the last mile to the last acre. Producers need that connectivity that extends far past main residences. They need connectivity around farmland and ranchland, but coverage across acreage isn't possible without both wired and wireless connections. Mr. Forty, do you think that rural development's broadband programs are missing an opportunity here to support producers and focus on last acre connectivity? And should we be looking to make sure USDA has the right balance of both last mile and last acre resources?
Yes, I couldn't agree more. We absolutely need to make sure that USDA is technology neutral, right? Our farm and agriculture communities that we serve and throughout the Midwest, we are simply not having fiber wires dragged behind combines, right? They will not be delivering that service to pastures, right? It is important that technology neutral future-proofs that for the future of the ag technology. Wireline won't always be the future, right? It's a wireless world that we live in. So I appreciate your efforts to try to focus the technology that the ag community wants and needs for the future, so that technology they have is also future-proof for the acre.
Yeah, I appreciated your comments about the vastness of rural America and really sparsely populated areas. You forgot to mention Nebraska and the Nebraska sandhills, especially where we're from. And with less than one person per square mile, it is important to be able to get to that last acre.
That's why I think the Rural Internet Improvement Act that you and Senator Klobuchar have sponsored, along with Senators Thune and Lohan, will be so important to really focus on those last unserved areas in the sandhills and make sure that those people get broadband first and are first in line before other people are getting 2 or 3 or 4 bites at the apple, so to speak, right? We need to make sure that they get that service out there, and we need to do that as fast as possible. In some of those areas, you might have a 8 or 9 mile long driveway, right?
Or longer.
And at $50,000-$60,000 a mile, that might take years to deploy a wireline service. And if we can quickly and efficiently deploy a wireless service that's fast and reliable in the middle of winter, let's get that done and let's get that person service tomorrow.
You know, I view broadband as essential infrastructure. It's an investment in our country. It's an investment in the future. It's like rural electric lines going out and connecting all of people in this country. It's like roads being built to connect people in this country. And it's, I think it's a right that every citizen should be able to have in order to have a future. I noticed, Mr. Forty, that there's been a lot of talk about using federal broadband programs to future-proof networks, but that term is not in any statute. Can you tell the committee what you think that means and whether your networks are future-proof?
Yeah, I think we will continue to invest to make sure all of our customers, rural customers, have the latest and greatest technology. And we would not build a system, whether that be fiber, HFC, or fixed wireless, that is not future-proof, right? They are all scalable. They are all made for the future of those residents. Nobody's building any networks today that aren't future-proof regardless of technology.
When it comes to farmland and ranchland, how do you future-proof that connectivity across acreage?
Yeah, you got your multiple forms of technology out there ready to serve that agriculture customer in the way that they want, right? If a farmer calls and says they want their drain tile pump connected, their grain dryer, and their water pumping station, right? We would need to be able to take care of that issue today, right? It's simply unfeasible to run wires to locations that farmers might not even know where they need tomorrow.
And we're talking about rural development and being able, I view that as strengthening rural America, to be able to have that development. It begins and ends with agriculture, in my opinion, no matter the state you're in. Agriculture in rural environments is vital, not just to those rural communities that they're near, but it's vital for the states themselves, and especially when you have big states there.
It's such an exciting area. All the development in ag tech is just tremendous, and we're excited to be a part of that ecosystem.
I am too. I'm excited for this farm bill and looking at precision agriculture and making sure we have the connections there to have it work for everybody. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Senator Stabenow, thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and that was a quick vote. You're very fast. That's good.
Get my fast steps in. I'm here with the coach.
I know.
Checking out my time on the 40-yard dash.
Yeah, well, I want to thank both of you. I'm really excited to work with both of you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, as well as with our Ranking Member in the committee, but because high-speed internet is not a luxury. I mean, we knew it. Many of us, I mean, I grew up in rural Michigan, where we all know it, but the pandemic sure showed us that it was not. And I grew up in a small town where, you know, the hospital was incredibly important. My mom was head of a nursing at a very small hospital, but telemedicine, all that happened. Too many stories that I've heard of kids sitting in the fast food restaurant parking lot trying to get Wi-Fi to do their homework or going to the only library or wherever it is. So this is so important. And I want to say, I'm glad we were getting we got additional dollars in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. I think that USDA rural development success in deploying high-speed internet is very, very important. We've seen it firsthand in Michigan. I think USDA, the Reconnect program, really important. Appreciate the work being done on that. Using $34 million in a grant from Reconnect, our Upper Peninsula telephone company will deploy a fiber to the premises network to connect over 1,600 Michiganders to high-speed internet, and that's a big deal. Up in the UP. So I'm looking forward to working with all of us to be able to do in the Farm Bill more so that we can connect all our farmers and communities, small businesses, hospitals, everybody in rural communities. We want people having a high quality of life. If they go away to college, we want them coming home to small towns and being a part of that. And high-speed internet's really important. Mr. Shackleton, what do you believe the committee should consider when looking at the minimum acceptable speed when evaluating if a household is served? And additionally, what do you believe should be the minimum required build-out speeds for applicants to the Reconnect program?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I believe that a speed to consider a premise served should be 100 by 100, and that should also be the minimum required build-out speed. I think we need to standardize on a definition and finally move forward with what we've been talking about as a scalable and future-proof solution. And it sounds to me like the definition of scalable and future-proof seems to be somewhat subject to interpretation. So if we take a trip down memory lane, for example, there were industry experts as in 2003 who were stating that by 2005, there were households, the average household would need 1 megabit of service. And there were other industry experts that thought they were crazy, that would never happen. Fast forward to 2010, the FCC's definition increased to 4 by 1. Fast forward to 2015, that's when it established 25 by 3. So if we're only looking at what's in front of us and we're simply meeting the needs of today, are we really giving consideration to the innovation and ingenuity of the American people? I don't think we are. I think when we look at the future and we look at the trends and the data that scale out to needing multi-gigabit speeds by 2030, that is absolutely, positively something that can happen and become a reality. So when we say future-proof, I think we need to make sure that we do invest wisely with these precious tax dollars. And if this truly is a once-in-a-generation opportunity with this funding, then we get one shot to do it right. Thank you.
Thank you. Building on that, Mr. Nishi, some may say that symmetrical internet connections are unnecessary for most rural customers. Why should USDA prioritize building symmetrical networks, and what are some of the long-term benefits of these connections?
I'll come back to the whole concept of universal service, where there should be reasonable comparable services at reasonable comparable rates in urban and rural areas. So a designer or an architect or someone that's living in a rural area to run their business, they may need 100 over 100 so that they can upload their work. So it's really coming back to a fairness and equitableness across all areas in the U.S.
Thank you. I will close, Mr. Chairman, but I just want to say that I think it's so important that we are doing our best to create high quality in rural communities and not just say a little bit is enough. You know, it's not just enough to be able to get a few, streaming TV shows or something. That we need to be talking about rural communities and rural businesses and hospitals and farmers and so on, having the same high quality that is in our urban areas. And so I hope we're going to, from my perspective, we're going to be able to move in that direction. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ranking Member Bozeman, thank you. It's good to be back. I work with him in the House.
I know, and we appreciate your friendship.
I heard he's gotten even better in the Senate, but he was pretty good in the House.
Well, you're doing pretty good in the Senate yourself, and we appreciate you, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Tuberville. This is a great hearing. In fact, I think this is one of the, just echoing what the chairwoman said, I think this is one of the most important hearings that we have. When you look at climate, when you look at trying to get cleaner air, cleaner water, healthier soils, I think the underpinning in the future is going to be dependent on technology that is going to be dependent on broadband. We used to think in terms of the 3 R's and waters as how you developed an area, roads, railroads, runways, and you throw water in, then you've got the potential for development. If you don't have broadband, you simply aren't going to develop. And with the loss of population in rural America, as the chairwoman said, not only do we need it, but we need it at strengths that we can actually do something with it. Mr. Forty, according to a GAO report published last year, there are currently more than 100 programs administered by 15 agencies that could be used to expand broadband access. Yet despite numerous programs and a federal investment of $44 billion from 2015 through 2020, millions of Americans still lack broadband. That's what we're talking about. With billions more authorized and spent since 2020 through Reconnect and other programs across government, have you seen a noticeable reduction in the number of unserved locations in rural and hard-to-reach areas of the states in which MIDCO operates?
No. In fact, we've hardly seen that needle move at all. That's because none of the funding sources actually target the people without broadband.
So what do we do to close the digital divide?
We absolutely need to make sure that people with no broadband are served first before anybody else gets any other funding to upgrade previously existing systems.
Okay, that's clear. We appreciate that. Another issue that comes up as I meet with constituents in Arkansas, I think all of us could say this, I often hear complaints about the Reconnect application process. According to one provider who we spoke with recently, their staff spent more than 300 hours just to complete one application. Has anyone on the panel had a similar experience? If so, do you have recommendations how we can streamline the process?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Yes, we've looked at the Reconnect application, but it simply is very difficult for private capital. Putting the government to have the first lien on assets, information about what we're doing throughout our footprint and build-out plans and some of the other requirements, as well as, of course, yes, the lengthy pages and details just certainly make it almost unworkable for design to work with companies such as ourselves. So, again, we hope that the Rural Internet Improvement Act will give us some access to help us reach those areas that we're talking about that are truly unserved with a grant program such as this.
May I add to that?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So we recently applied for both Reconnect 3 and Reconnect 4, so it's fresh in our mind. This is the application
You look traumatized.
a little bit. This is the application without any of the supporting documentation. And so I have two recommendations. The first is that for Reconnect, for Community Connect, even for the Broadband Technical Assistance Program, we should make it a two-step application process. They're points-based, right? And so if we have a pretty simple form that people can fill out, then the application process can weed out the bottom 4/5 of applications that don't have a fighting chance of doing it. Then when you're investing the time, you have at least the knowledge that you've got a pretty good shot at getting funding and that you're going to get it back. And I think one of the things to recognize is what is required to do this. Part of it is extremely detailed budgets and financials. We're talking 10 years of budgets and financials that integrate with your existing budgets and then move forward. In order to do the kind of detailed budget that Reconnect asks for, which is very detailed, you effectively have to do a design. But if you're a small provider, you can't invest in a design for an area that you can't afford to build until you have a knowledge that you're going to be able to go there. So it really is, we were fortunate to be able to raise money to use consultants to do it. We couldn't have done it without the consultants. And the second big lift in USDA particular is that there's a difference in information that's used. USDA uses households, we use premises, the BDC maps is someplace in between those two things. And so when you put in the number of people that are going to take service every year under every single service offering, it doesn't match what's going on, right? So it doesn't match your financials. So in other words, we just need to streamline the data that we're using, the mapping, the household premises, but most importantly, let's do a two-step application process for all of these grant programs.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I was in the Indiana State House back in 15, 16, and 17, we're a state, first of all, that always has cash flow. We invest. We're right now in the process of putting money into rural broadband. But what we did, what was unique, and I was part of it, was it had never been done before on road funding, for instance. And when it was proposed, it was called community crossings. That's where the state government put out, I think we started with $1 million fund per municipality or county government, up to which they could match. And first of all, everybody complained about it, number one, because they didn't want any skin in the game. Now they want even higher levels of putting skin in the game and want more money from the state to do it. So what about taking the same idea currently with broadband, and whatever we do here, reward more to folks back in the states, in the places trying to do it, and maybe for the places that aren't getting it, for whatever the arbitrary reason might be, to where they would be given preference based upon putting more of their own skin in the game. I'll ask Mr. Johnson and Mr. Forty what you think about that.
Senator, I would tell you that on a very personal note, I think you're right on. Having sufficient investment by potential providers in the game is absolutely essential to avoiding, respectfully, the entrance into the market by fly-by-nights that are simply taking an opportunity for short-term gain without a long-term commitment to the sustainability of those networks. I have always personally argued that minimum requirements such as 20–25% are essential, first of all, but I also encourage other kinds of skin in the game, such as a demonstrated history of delivering the service, or for lack of better terms, some form of sufficient evidence that they are capable of delivering on the promise. And whether that's a government entity or a private entity, you're still on track. The more skin in the game they have, the more likely they are to be successful.
From Midco's experience, we will not take more than any public dollars that are needed. There are some state grant programs that we participated in where we will have our Midco contribution be as high as possible and take as little of taxpayer dollars as possible to fund build out to those areas to make it feasible for private capital. So we are always doing that. And I recently found out in one of the states we serve that we're now the only provider in the state is it extending to homes surrounding our current network without asking the government for more money.
And I think another good reason is we're currently running deficits that we've never seen in the history of our country, and the getting more cost sharing from folks back home would seem to make sense to stretch what I think is going to be a more difficult federal dollar to get a hold of. What I hear often in traveling around the state as well, and may have been addressed earlier, but would be some of the regulations involved that are currently in place that constitute what a suitable level of service would be. And it's clear that in the very rural areas, it's close to zero. We're dealing with that currently, and I think addressing it pretty well in Indiana. The places where I heard it's been most difficult is where some of the biggest providers provide the internet service where you got customers per mile in any place where you got population. But when you drift into that kind of twilight zone between the very rural and the places just outside of the so-called well-served areas, and then you're using peculiar formulas that seem to keep so many people in a place where it's not that far away, the big providers don't seem very anxious to even go anywhere if it's not doesn't have the density, and then hide behind formulas that keep them from serving those areas that I've described. Anyone that wants to weigh in on that, start over with Mr. Forty and Mr. Johnson, whoever else wants to come in.
I can say we absolutely love those areas, and we love building them all with 100% private capital. And we have the financial business model works perfect for us to build in all those areas. We're doing that around all of our cities throughout the Midwest.
And are you ever running into issues where even though you want to do it, you can't because there's some regulation or formula that keeps you from going in there?
You know, not so much on the financials, but there's certainly occasionally there's permitting issues. Certainly things such as fair access to poles, crossing railroad tracks, environmental rules and regulations, crossing rivers. You know, those are some of the barriers that we see in some of those areas that slow us down at the very least from getting broadband out to those folks who are just across the tracks, so to speak.
Thank you.
I commend him for his use of private capital, but it is extremely important that we remember this. The reason all of rural America does not have broadband is because historically there has been insufficient economic incentive to attract private capital to get that job done. It will not happen without government subsidy. That's the only business case. And to your point about adequate technology, I would respectfully submit that some of that debate can be resolved if we ever take the time to actually look at the physical properties and the physical capabilities of the various tools we are using to deploy broadband. It will answer a lot of the questions about what is and is not future-proof technology.
Anybody else want to briefly weigh in? Go ahead.
I think it's about developing the basic infrastructure, and when we look at the areas in that twilight zone between between the very rural and the urban, I think the BEAD program is going to be able to address that. What Reconnect needs to address is the areas that go back from that, and the infrastructure is what we're building on, just like we did with rural electrification, and that's what takes us into the future.
I'd like to add that 100 over 100 is important. The Fiber Broadband Association Ookla study shows that in 2023, households are already using 100 over 100. And at the same time, there were those that said the rounds 3 and 4 Reconnect shouldn't have those standards in it, but at the same time, it was 4 to 5 times oversubscribed. So there are many people out there that believe in 100 over 100 networks.
Could I just add that I think one of the challenges that some rural states face is that when you have 25/3 wireless technology that provides spotty service throughout an area, you can become disqualified from a grant program. So the entire state of Vermont is basically going to be disqualified from Reconnect 5 as it currently stands, and yet those folks a lot of them have less than 4 down, 1 up from a wired connection. When you live in rural areas, like many parts of the country with a lot of hills and mountains and weather, that wireless service doesn't always exist. And that's why we need to get to those folks and to provide a level that makes sure everyone has a wired connection.
And I would just like to comment on one part of Mr. Forty's comments, that we feel that pole attachments are not a barrier to deployment of broadband. In fact, in the cooperative space, we are an at-cost model. We do not make any profit off of that. And it is specifically the at-cost model of each co-op, depending on its geographic location of the system that it operates. And they're well-maintained facilities. And there's actually been proven evidence where cooperatives have offered other entities to come in at $0 as long as they promise to bring robust, reliable, high-speed internet to every one of their members, and there was no response.
Thank you.
Yeah, I got one question here. Mr. Forty, Mr. Johnson, why is it so important to keep the required percentages of unserved locations within an awarded area as high as possible and not lowered to 50%? As the most recent Reconnect round of funding does to successfully deploy broadband to the most rural areas?
I'll go back to my original comment. There are reasonable arguments that can be made on both ends of that spectrum where that should be. But the reality of it is we're talking long-term solutions and limited dollars. The lower that threshold, commonly somewhere between 80, 85, 90% historically, the lower that threshold, I can assure you the higher probability that scarce taxpayer dollars will be used to improve existing networks at the expense of those who have nothing or completely inadequate service.
Absolutely. We have to focus on those truly unserved areas. The percentages have to be 90 or higher for all of these programs to ensure that those people with nothing get served first before we can look at folks that need financial help to upgrade in their areas if they need that.
Thank you. And
I think,
go ahead.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
I think it's critical that the percentages be part of the point system. So that's what USDA has done, right? There's an eligibility level, but then there's a point system that enables the understanding of RUS staff of what's on the ground, because every state is different. We just simply have different needs. We are looking to get to the most unserved. The way to do that is to allow USDA to put point systems in place, as it already has, to accommodate those.
And one other question, whoever wants to answer this, we probably going to need to know this. If when we get in all these real deep rural areas, what is the most burdensome permitting issue that we have and we're going to have coming up, going into these rural areas? Anybody want to just throw your 2 cents worth in?
I'd say that the most burdensome is the make-ready licensing. A lot of the most rural areas are cooperatives that had to cut across farmlands that are now trees and forests and no longer farmlands, so there's a high cost there. I also think a two-step application can help us get through the federal permitting process by starting the process at the beginning, at the end of the first step, so that by the time we get the application, we can start working. We are going to have to wait to get through that federal permitting process, and we are ready to go on the ground right now today, if we could.
To keep the application process running and to get approvals quicker, we believe that there should be some shot clocks for the various agencies where if they don't give the approval in times it's deemed approved. At the same time, there are areas where there's previously disturbed where we need to go through permit process, even though we already may have cable there. That approval needs to speed up also. We're there already, so why do we need to go through the whole process again? And finally, there's a lot more applications now with all the money out there in builds, so we need to make sure that the various agencies are adequately staffed in approving these applications.
Senator, FTC has not encountered this for unique reasons, but across the country, many of our colleagues face considerable difficulty with right-of-way when it pertains to the railroads.
Yeah, I think, anything we can do to streamline the processes for all the federal agencies, and applications would be very helpful to serve rural America. Certainly, if our application works for the FCC, it should work for USDA from that perspective. The environmental for crossing rivers has been extremely difficult with the Army Corps and the myriad of agencies to deal with there. And I would echo the comments of others in those agencies. But streamlining those processes and the needs of broadband will help us deploy a lot faster. But I do not think you can tackle just one. I think we need to tackle them all because every situation is different.
Senator Bozeman?
Yes, sir. Very quickly, if it's okay. Just following up on the permitting process, the difficulties. I was going to ask about forest land, federal forest land, and how difficult that is. You've got, pretty stringent timeframes with RUS and other things. Those processes can last forever, in the sense of the permitting. Should Congress in the Farm Bill require the Forest Service, which happens to fall under the jurisdiction of the USDA, to expedite the approval process for projects supported by federal broadband deployment programs? Does anybody want to jump in on that one? Don't worry, they're not going to treat you any worse than they do now. You don't have to comment if you don't want to, but again, this is something we need to work on, and especially when you have two agencies, we're trying to do one thing with one agency that's a very good thing. When you've got another agency that sometimes is not quite as helpful as we'd like for them to be.
Senator, I'll brave the question. Yes, absolutely, and you have jurisdiction. I would just simply remind it's a government-wide issue. There are a lot of permits, a lot of issues from environmental, all with legitimate concerns. But either we will do better as a country in resolving those questions expeditiously, or people will not get broadband as quickly as we need them to.
Right. And again, I'm not saying that they don't do the appropriate protocols, but let's do it in an expeditious way so you all can get to work and get things done. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I will add that, in some of those Forest Service areas that we've seen, if there's an existing, road right away and easement, or a road's going through the Forest Service already, the ability to just access that with a limited fast permit process makes total sense rather than having to go through a whole separate process or create a whole separate easement to go through those areas that are already ready to be deployed.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We're going to wait a few minutes. Senator Ben Ray Lujan wants to, it's on his way back from the vote and wants to ask a few questions. So I'll sort of give a semi-closing statement. First of all, this is an incredibly helpful hearing in getting the cross-section that each of you has of experience was very helpful. A couple of things. One, there seems to be uniformity that having a simplified application process really is beneficial. Number two, Senator Braun's question about skin in the game, and you explained part of that is financial, but part of it is a history of success and accomplishment. And because there's a lot of areas in rural America where the capital just isn't there. And a big decision that Congress made with rural electrification was that it was worth it to do it for political and social reasons. It wasn't because it was economically beneficial to do it. And I think a lot of us on this committee think the political and social reasons are really good reasons, right? And then I heard uniformity about let's not tax the grants. The grant you thought was, 10x, it turns out to be 7x. I'd be bummed out with that. So you don't like that. And then the permit process, and there's two parts that I made. Some, the federal, which we would have some jurisdiction over, but then local, where it's just every locality is different. But hopefully you get some you get some cooperation. The big issue here that I think is a major policy question is this future proofing. That's the term that we're using. But what it means to me is we can't give second-class service to rural America. And I think Senator Stabenow really used a phrase I like. Good enough isn't good enough because it's good enough for today, but we don't get anywhere unless we make a commitment that good enough is what's good enough for everybody. And one of the reasons, by the way, there's all kinds of reasons, but we're trying to get folks to come into rural America. And in Vermont, when somebody's looking at a house, if they are not where there's high-speed internet, then it's a person who might want to be moving up. They just won't. That's the end of the deal. That's it. They're not coming. And we've got to get jobs and entrepreneurs and folks back into rural America. And those people will not come unless there's confidence that they've got sustainable, high-speed, state-of-the-art internet. So, you know, that's a design question. The engineers know about it. Is Senator Lujan coming? It's all right. So we're all disappointed Senator Lujan can't make it here because he is a big champion and a wonderful senator. And we have finished with this hearing. It was really terrific. I think what you saw and you're experiencing, I hope, is that there is a bipartisan commitment from members of the U.S. Senate who have a commitment to rural America. And, you know, we come from different parties and have different political points of view, but there's a strong unity here that the importance of rural America can't be a second-class part of America. We'll keep the record open for 5 days for any additional questions from members or submissions from witnesses. And with that, I'll declare the hearing over.